On day 20, we'll focus on maps and other visual representations of your story's world. Why draw maps? Maps bring visual information. They bring clarity. They reveal the complexity of your world. For you, for your characters, and for the public. Now, how should you draw them? You want to focus on two main elements: the limits of your map and the loci of your map. Maps are intended to be clear. That's the most important factor when it comes to visual representation. So the same as for the characters, you want to focus on clear, simple form. Now, when it comes to this geographical information, you want your map to be as clear as possible, to be predictable in the evolution of your story. You want them also to be just complex enough to be interesting, to allow you to suscitate the interest of your public. You want to define the limits of your map. Defining your limits early allows you to indicate to your public and to your characters what will be possible in this world, in this region, in this settlement. The limits of your map offer predictability and they ensure your cohesion. Subsequently, you want to define the fundamental locations on your map. These locations, these settings, these buildings most of the time, will be the main places for your character to find the resources they need. These resources, again, may be other characters, which will grant them direct resources. They can be energy sources, and they can be land. Balancing properly your limits and your loci will allow you to have a smoother evolution through your story. Now, you want to be able to conserve a high degree of flexibility through your whole story in order to continue to surprise and entertain your public and place new interesting trials for your characters. So again, your maps have two objectives. Be complex enough to be interesting and be clear enough to be predictable. There will be two main ways to represent your maps. You'll either use a top-down view, very similar to a planisphere, or either a three-quarter view. Again, showing from the top, but with a slight tilt just to show more details. For example, if you want to implement things like perspective into your map and show a relative distance between the building on another type of view. Now, you want to start by designing blocks, by zoning your map in a very, very broad manner. You want to either have something just easy to recognize, really simple to recognize, or something that's a little more difficult to recognize but maybe more interesting. So maybe you want to implement some simple shapes like so, and have this shape, even if they're not the most interesting, they give you a clear idea of what the people of each region of the world want. For example, you may want to introduce some form of irregularity, like so, in your general zone designs. So you start to characterize the kind of inhabitant, the kind of people of each environment and what they want, what they may desire. So, for example, let's suppose we have 3 zones, and we want to display to the reader, to the public, and to the characters what is in each of these zones. So let's suppose that each of these zones needs a capital. For example, this zone here is the capital of the macro zone in red. You have a sort of a city here. A quite broad city, quite established. Taking a lot of the area in red. Same thing for the zone in purple. You have a zone here which will serve as the capital, which is already divided in sectors. You have blocks in the zone. Certain blocks, for example, will only be accessible to certain specific people regarding, let's say, their profession. Others will be accessible for a question of status. And you generalize really, like so. You have multiple possibilities to develop your zone. Maybe there are some broader zone in an opposite area. You have these zones which follow really the same logic but for other reasons. For example, maybe this zone here, the industrial zone, whereas this zone is made for commerce and trade. And you may have multiple use for a single zone. So let's say that this zone, which is the intermediate zone, here, this additional zone here is used for all kind of expositions, and exhibitions of all sorts. Excuse me. Whereas you have and you still have a lot of extra room, here, all this area, all this region is still unused, so you can turn them into gardens, for example. If this let's say it's a city, the quadrant in purple, it's a city, and it's in a highly industrial city. It's a city which revolves around industry. Maybe the inhabitants will need some form of green spaces, and that's why they need gardens. They need gardens in all this area. No, it's not that large, it's not that broad, but they need so. But the section in purple, in deep purple, is the residential area. Here we have trade, and here we have industries. Now that's really enough. You only ever need three to four kind of zones. You need places where people can live, places where people can work, and places where people can entertain themselves. So you have all these three here. And, you just apply the same logic for all the other part of the quadrant. For example, let's say this part for the part in red is the residential area, but there are some commerces too. Do you need an industrial part in this section, or do these two let's say nations, these two settlements, trade with one another? Maybe this industrial part is also beneficial to this part, or maybe even not, because they may need a different kind of resources, they may need a different kind of specialization. So you may want to divide residential area right here, which has I suppose there's a specific resource here, a specific plant, a specific kind of ore, specific kind of mineral, which is only available in this, this mountain. Now that's a mountain. It's a region with lots of elevation. That's a mountain, and that there's a mine here. this mine is directly linked to the city. City which is itself placed on a hill, you know? There's this geographical complexity here. And let's say the rest of the environment is just plains, you know? You have plains in the rest of the environment. Because you have mountains, you know, you'll probably have some form of rivers coming from these, from the hills, coming from the mountain itself. And that's it really. That's all the consideration you want to put into perspective to add to the complexity of your map. Now we have a third part here. Now let's say this third part is all about developing entertainment. You know, so what kind of entertainment places we have? Do we have for example a little leisure park here? No, we have a leisure park with different kind of attraction. Now, for example, here you have a, let's say, a fountain or a lake, a large lake, in the middle of which is the main island of the park. You know, that's the administration center of the park, for example. See, in the very center of the park, right here, with all the watery conducts of the park, all the water, placing two things, the streets and the water, and placing every kind of building in your city according to water and according to where you place the streets is absolutely essential if you're starting. So let's say, for example, here we have a broad idea of all the buildings which will be part of this system. You know, you have this node here, and try to vary the size of the different nodes. This node here, this node here, this node here, and they're all linked by roads. You know, we have our network here, and this network will allow us to predict the level of efficiency of these people, of this population. You know, are they efficient? Because if they have a great urbanist plan, in fact, you know, they're supposed to be efficient. So now, for the connection between all these parts, because now we have three parts. How do they connect? How much do they connect? You know, there are certain rivers here I drew that wouldn't make much sense in a real world. That's not what we're looking for. No, we're just looking for a template. You know, we're looking for pattern. You know, you want your characters, you want your public to be able to recognize pattern easily. You know, all you do here is intended to be useful for the user. So the user must be able to read your map easily, to analyze, to interpret easily, to decode the pattern you're proposing her. Now you want it to be tangible. You want it to be believable. That's right here. That's right there. The very fact that there's that much water and the roadmap, the grid, you know, the transportation grid follows the flow of the river. This much should give you a critical indication. You know, these people love water. They need water. They want water. Water is part of their life. It's absolutely essential for them to survive. It's essential to their activities in this part. No, let's suppose that the city is an enormous leisure park. You know, it's made for that. You may have a part with traditional attractions here. You may have something for maybe a futuristic attraction, whatever that means in this world. You may have part with let's say things that are based on transportation are here. here you have more gardens. No, in this zone you have a little more gardens here too. Gardens there. You want to plant. You want to put some plant on multiple places on your map. And these plants, these plants, and these plants should be different. They should all be specific of the region in which they grew. Now let's add a fourth part. Now, which kind of fourth part would we need? We have rivers, but we don't have sea here. We don't have a sea. We don't have an ocean. Let's suppose all that rests on the ocean. Let's suppose all that part, here is an archipelago. We have that here. And you really want to generate this shape. The more like, the more Earth-like you want your shapes to be, the more the more complex they will become. These last shapes in blue that you can see, they are still geometrical shapes. There's no opposition between the quadrilateral in purple and these last shapes in blue. They're all geometrical shapes because every shape is a geometrical shape. The only difference is that the last ones are more complex. If you want to get closer to nature, to natural shapes, you want to use geometry. But you want to make shapes that are more difficult to recognize. Maybe, for example, this one. It's more of a potato. This one may look like a rutabaga, a root vegetable. These ones, same thing. They're bits of rocks. So it's shaped by atmospheric underground conditions, temperature and pressure variations. Intense temperature and intense pressure variation. So all of these will have very, very peculiar, very unique shapes, and most of all, very complementary shapes. You have to draw all these shapes for them to look like as if they were a whole. In the beginning, all of this was one big block of Earth, and now they detached progressively. So what's on there? Let's suppose that all the part now that we've covered in blue are inhabited. All of that is inhabited by let's say creatures that are sapient. Creature with a level of intelligence which is comparable to humans. And on all the rest, you have forest, you have jungle. You have a large development of lesser creature, you would like to say. I'm not sure that's the proper word. Sentient creatures, but not necessarily sapient creatures. I think that's just a better way to say it. And all this part, with all the irregularities, it's mostly forest, it's mostly jungle, and you pick what you want to make out of it, because forest and the jungle have a very difficult ecologies, so you want to make it the way you want to. And let's say it's a very peculiar kind of forest and jungle. And in these parts, for example, the parts in almost colored in white, you have some icy development. All that is a more ice-like region. All these parts here. It may look a little bit irregular, but think of the plants in these and the animals in this region that they've adapted to the environment. So if it's an environment with a very low temperature, they may be inclined to be like so. And the very fact that there's ice gives you the possibility to create bridges between these islands. For example, you want to have natural bridges between the islands. maybe not everywhere, because we can imagine that in these parts, for example, the temperature is higher, and so there's no ice here. Maybe there's some mist, maybe there's some fog, but maybe there's no ice. Whereas here you have large icy zone, you have large snowy zones, and all those create bridges between the different islands of the archipelago. Well, that's quite interesting. And you can expand that. You can expand this archipelago to larger territories. You can make it penetrate all the other zones if you want, maybe with something like that. So that's inhabited by inhabitants of the world in blue, but maybe inhabitants of the world in red as well. And maybe inhabitants of the world in green also. You may want to create these sort of condominiums, sort of share the territories between the different kind of population in your world. That creates diversity, that creates more complexity, more interest. And really, this kind of map will allow you just to play more. When you have your world map. So let's suppose you're writing a saga, you're writing a series, and now you have your world map. So that's sufficient for now. We can complexify that much more. For example, we can say, because we haven't defined the capital of the world in blue, we can, for example, define that the capital of the world in blue is there. For example, that's the capital, but it's supposed that the administrative capital is here, whereas the economical capital is here, and the entertainment-based capital is here. And finally, we have something like the palace, the Great Palace here, And you want to create maybe a maze between these different places. You can add as much complexity as necessary. You're playing here, you're experimenting here. So you may add more trades road, more kinds of industries, more kind of resources, beasts, beasts and animals, the species of your world. All that is possible after you started to create the right amount of complexity. And here, we have a clear map. So let's get back to the basics we needed. You're starting a series, you're starting a saga, because now you love your story. You want to write more, you want to write more stories. So you're starting your series, your saga. You have your world. Your world is just complex enough. It's just the right level. You don't need to change anything, or so you think. Okay, because that's the part that will evolve through the story. But let's suppose for now your world is just clear enough, because these are our two objectives when it comes to world maps. Your words need to be clear enough to be readable, to be easy to interpret, and your world needs to be complex enough to be interesting, or said another way, to give you enough flexibility for you to create more interest later. So that's the balance we've reached here. Now, with each new story, you can add a layer of complexity. You want to balance that still, for example, you may want to make the industrial quarter in the purple section more complex. For example, right now it's empty. It's absolutely empty. We don't know which kind of industries are in there. So you may want to add that in let's say your third book or your fourth book, or the third season of your series, the third episode of your game series, whichever format you're choosing to use. What matters now is you have the right level of clarity. You have clear colored zones, you have clear limits for each zone, and you have the right amount of complexity to start, because now you're in this, you want to play with this map, you want to change this map, you want to redraw it at least 2 more times, because this is just a first draft. You may want to redraw it multiple times. with a different angle, and that's what we'll do just after this. For example, you may want to try to draw a 3/4 view of this map, just to check all of your options, check all of the choices you have, check all the possibilities you have for future adventures, future stories, future games. So that's the balance we are intending to reach here.